At family dinner, she pointed to the far corner and said it with a smile too sweet to be real. "You can sit there. The kids' table has a free spot." For a second, the room seemed to stop breathing. Forks hovered, glasses paused halfway to lips, and I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My husband's mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried enough sting. I smiled. That was all. A polite curve of the lips, nothing more. No protest, no visible crack. Inside, though, the words burned. My chair scraped softly as I moved. I walked to the table, meant for children, tiny chairs, plastic cups, and leftover crayons from some long-forgotten gathering. My dress brushed the edge of the tablecloth, too fine for this setting. My knees bent awkwardly, folding into a space never meant for me. The children stared with wide eyes, confused why I was sitting among them. The room filled again with conversation, forced laughter, and clinking silverware. She had made her point. She wanted everyone to know exactly where she believed I belonged. Lower, smaller. Not an equal, not truly family. Just another inconvenience to be hidden in plain sight. I kept my hands steady as I picked up the water glass. The glass was cheap, cloudy, already smeared with fingerprints. My lips barely touched it, yet I felt as if I was swallowing ashes. Around me, the children whispered, one of them tugging at my sleeve and asking why Grandma had told me to sit with them. Their innocence sliced deeper than any insult. I lifted my eyes to the long table. Candles flickered against polished silver. Crystal glasses reflected golden wine. At the head sat my mother-in-law, radiant in her control, the center of every joke and every nod. My husband sat beside her, his face tight, jaw set, yet he said nothing. His silence was another kind of weight pressing down on me. My smile stayed fixed. My heart, however, hammered so hard I thought the children might hear it. Every breath was measured, every blink deliberate. This wasn't new. It was just another performance in a play I had been forced to rehearse for years. I had been the outsider at vacations, the forgotten one in family portraits, the name left off invitations. This dinner was no different. Only the props had changed. I let the laughter at the main table wash over me, like waves breaking against a shore I could never reach. I stirred the mashed potatoes placed in front of me, though I had no appetite. My mind wandered, not to the food, not to the chatter, but to every moment that had led to this one. There was the Christmas when she handed out gifts to everyone except me, claiming mine must have been misplaced. There was the summer barbecue where she introduced me to a neighbor as just the wife, her tone making it clear I was nothing more. There were countless birthdays where I watched her kiss every grandchild's cheek except my own son's, then smile at me as if daring me to comment. Each memory layered itself on top of the present moment, bricks in a wall I had carried for too long. Sitting at the kids' table was not humiliation by accident. It was the sharp edge of her power, a reminder that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I tried, she could reduce me with a single sentence. I looked at her. She laughed at something my brother-in-law said, tilting her head back, pearls gleaming at her throat. But she knew. I saw the quick flick of her eyes toward me, the satisfaction in the corner of her mouth. She wanted me to react, to break, to give her the victory of my outrage. So I did the opposite. I smiled wider, my eyes soft, my posture graceful despite the awkward chair. I poured myself water with a calm hand, even offered bread to the little boy beside me. I played the role of content guest. Inside, though, my mind was working, sharpening like glass under pressure. Minutes stretched into something heavier. Conversations blurred, laughter rang hollow, and every so often, someone glanced at me, then quickly away. They all saw. They all knew. Yet no one spoke. Silence was safer. Silence protected them from becoming her next target. I thought about leaving, just standing up, walking out, and never returning. The image comforted me for a moment, but then another thought rose, slow and deliberate. Leaving would give her what she wanted. Proof that I could not endure. Proof that she held the power to exile me from my own family. So I stayed. I sipped water. I smiled. I listened to the children's chatter. I let the humiliation settle, not as defeat but as fuel. Because if she thought this was the end of the story, she was mistaken. This was only the beginning. When the server came around to refill glasses, I caught the reflection in his eyes. A flicker of pity. Maybe admiration. It was brief, but it was enough. Someone had noticed. Someone saw the imbalance, the cruelty cloaked in etiquette. That glance steadied me more than any comforting word could have. The longer I sat, the more I realized something else. Her control was fragile. It depended on my silence, on the family's complicity, on the performance of harmony around her throne. The moment I chose not to play along, the moment I shifted even slightly, her power would crack. I set my fork down quietly, my hands folded in my lap. My eyes lifted once more to her face. She was telling a story now, animated, her hands moving, her smile wide. The others laughed on cue. But underneath it, I saw her glance at me again, quick and sharp. She was checking. She was waiting. I held her gaze for just a second longer than polite. Not hostile, not pleading. Simply steady. Her smile faltered, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. The children at my table had returned to their food, their chatter innocent and unbothered. Yet for me, every detail carried weight. The clink of the silverware, the rustle of napkins, the faint scent of roasted chicken and red wine, all of it marked the stage for what would come. I breathed in slowly, exhaled just as slow. My heart no longer raced. Instead, it beat with measured certainty. I knew what I would do, and when the moment came, I would not need to raise my voice or slam my fist. I lifted my glass again, letting the water catch the candlelight. It shimmered faintly, a reflection of my restraint, my patience. I smiled once more, a smile that no longer hid pain but promised something else. This was not surrender. This was strategy, and she didn't know yet that she had already given me the opening I needed. The night was still young. The children at the table began to relax around me. One little girl passed me a crayon and whispered if I wanted to color with her. I smiled and took it, tracing a meaningless swirl on the paper placemat. My fingers moved automatically, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound from the long table pierced through me, the clinking of glasses, the way my mother-in-law's laugh rose above everyone else, the subtle murmurs when someone noticed me sitting at the corner. I sat very still. To anyone watching, I looked calm, maybe even resigned. But inside, the humiliation settled into something heavier. It was not just tonight. It was years of these small stage degradations, disguised as tradition, disguised as family etiquette. She wanted me to shrink, to make myself small enough that she could forget I was there. One of the children leaned closer and asked why I was not sitting with the adults. His eyes were innocent, but his words stabbed. I swallowed and told him gently that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. He nodded, confused, then returned to his food. His question lingered like smoke in my chest. I glanced again at the main table. My husband kept his head lowered. He poked at his food and offered small nods to his mother, but he never looked my way. That silence cut more deeply than her command. He knew. He saw. Yet he chose not to defend me. Perhaps he thought silence was safety. Perhaps he thought my smile meant I was fine. But I noticed the tightness in his shoulders, the way his jaw flexed when she laughed too loudly. He was trapped too, though in a different way. I let my eyes wander around the room. The chandelier cast golden light that shimmered across polished glasses. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic butter filled the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of red wine. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, their eyes careful not to linger on me for too long. But I caught it once, the quick glance of a server when he poured water near me. There was pity in his eyes, quickly masked with professionalism. That glance told me everything. People noticed. Even strangers noticed. My fork scraped against the plate. The sound seemed louder than it should have. I set it down softly, pretending I had no appetite. In truth, I could not swallow. My throat was tight, my chest heavy, but I forced my breathing steady. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. I thought back to the first time I joined one of these family dinners. Newly married, I had worn my best dress, hair pinned carefully, hands shaking with the hope of being accepted. She had welcomed me then with a smile too bright, a compliment too rehearsed. I thought it was kindness. Later that night, she told my husband quietly, thinking I would not hear, "She is trying too hard." That was the beginning. a small crack that widened with every gathering since. The room around me blurred as memory took over. Birthdays where she praised every dish except mine. Vacations where she booked a villa but forgot my name on the reservation. Even my wedding day when she whispered to her sister that I was not the bride she imagined for her son. Every insult had been disguised as a joke, every slight brushed aside as misunderstanding. But tonight, there was no disguise. Tonight, she wanted the entire family to see. The children laughed suddenly, breaking my thoughts. One spilled juice across the table. I grabbed a napkin quickly, wiping it up, and they giggled at my careful hands. My smile toward them was real. They did not deserve to be part of this performance. They were innocent, unaware of the stage their grandmother had built. But my smile faded as soon as I lifted my eyes again. Across the room, she was watching me. Her lips curled slightly, just enough to show triumph. She raised her glass, clinking it with another relative, never breaking eye contact with me. That was her signal. She thought she had won. She thought I was locked in my place, diminished and forgotten. But what she did not understand was that humiliation can be a seed. Planted deep, watered with silence, it grows into something far stronger than outrage. I let her believe she had control. I let her enjoy her victory. Meanwhile, inside me, a plan was forming. Not dramatic, not loud, but precise. I leaned back in the tiny chair, letting my hands rest in my lap. The children returned to their food, chatter filling the space. Around us, the adults continued their performance of harmony. The tablecloth glowed under candlelight. Laughter rose and fell like a rehearsed symphony. But beneath it all, there was a tension. I could feel it pressing against my skin, buzzing in my ears. I thought about my own mother. She used to tell me that dignity was not always in the words spoken, but in the words withheld. Sometimes silence is not surrender, she would say. It is the sharpest blade. I never understood her fully until that moment. Sitting at the kids' table, insulted and isolated, I realized I held something sharper than anger. I held patience. My fingers traced the rim of my glass. The cool surface steadied me. I watched as the candlelight caught in the water, throwing tiny sparks of light against the wall. It reminded me that even something clear and calm can reflect fire if the angle is right. I smiled faintly at the thought. The longer I waited, the more restless she became. I saw it in her eyes. She expected me to react. She wanted me to fumble, to raise my voice, to storm out. My calmness unsettled her. It was not the script she had prepared. That was when I knew I had already begun to win. The dinner continued, but for me, time slowed. Every detail sharpened. The scrape of knives against plates. The smell of gravy mingling with roasted vegetables. The hush that occasionally fell when someone glanced toward me. My humiliation had become the unspoken centerpiece of the table. Everyone knew it. No one dared to say it. I leaned slightly forward, folded my hands, and let a small breath escape. I was not defeated. I was watching, listening, waiting, and soon, when the moment came, I would stand. Not in anger, not in chaos, but with precision. For now, I let the silence stretch. I let her think she had the upper hand, because when I finally chose to act, it would not just be a reaction, it would be reckoning, and she would never see it coming. I sat at that little table, surrounded by children who had already returned to their games, but my mind was far away. The taste of humiliation stirred memories I had tried to bury. Tonight was not the first time she had reminded me of my place, or rather, the place she thought I deserved. It had been happening for years, in small calculated cuts, each one disguised as family tradition or innocent oversight. I remembered the first Christmas after I married her son. I had chosen gifts carefully, staying up late to wrap them with ribbon and handwritten notes. That morning, in her living room, paper ripped and laughter filled the air as everyone unwrapped something thoughtful. Everyone except me. She handed presents to my husband, to her daughters, even to the cousins who had arrived late. When I sat there waiting, she tilted her head and said, "Oh dear, it must have been misplaced." The words were smooth, almost apologetic, but the smirk in her eyes betrayed the truth. I had swallowed the sting, telling myself it was just a mistake. There was the summer barbecue 2 years later. The yard was filled with neighbors, music, and the smell of grilled meat. She introduced everyone with pride. Her sons, her daughters, her grandchildren. When I stood beside my husband, smiling politely, she gestured vaguely and said, "This is just the wife. No name, no warmth, just a title meant to erase me." I laughed lightly then, as if it did not matter, but inside it hollowed something out of me. On my wedding day, the memory still stings like a fresh wound. I caught her whispering to her sister, her voice low but sharp, "Not the bride I imagined for my son." My bouquet trembled in my hands, but I forced my eyes forward. I had promised myself that day that love would be enough, that my husband and I would create a new family of our own. I did not realize then how determined she was to make sure I never truly belonged. Even small family gatherings carried their weight. At birthdays, she praised every dish except mine. She once tasted the cake I baked, smiled, and said, "Well, it is nice that you tried." Her words floated into the air like harmless chatter, but I saw the way the others glanced at me, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. The message was clear. I was always second-rate in her world. Vacations were another stage for her games. One winter, the family planned a trip to the mountains. She booked the villa herself. When we arrived, I discovered that my name was missing from the reservation list. Everyone else had a room key waiting, except me. "Oh, it must have been the booking system," she said with false concern. I ended up sleeping on a couch, blankets too thin against the cold. She smiled sweetly at me the next morning and asked if I had slept well. My lips answered yes, but my heart whispered no. The pattern was relentless. Even in casual conversation, she wielded her words like weapons hidden in silk. Once at dinner, she turned to me and said, "You must be grateful we let you into this family. Not every woman would have the chance." Everyone laughed politely, treating it as a joke, but I sat frozen, fork trembling in my hand, pretending her comment had not sliced straight through me. Each slight on its own might have seemed trivial, a forgotten gift, a missing name, a cruel joke. But together they built a cage around me, a reminder that in her eyes I would never be equal, never truly one of them. Tonight was only the latest scene in a long performance she had been perfecting for years. My hands clenched slightly under the table. I forced them open, smoothing the napkin across my lap. The children giggled beside me, chasing peas across their plates, oblivious to the storm inside my chest. I envied their innocence, their ability to exist without the sharp edges of manipulation cutting into them. I thought back to the day my son was born. I had been exhausted, trembling, overwhelmed by the tiny life in my arms. She had entered the hospital room with flowers and smiles for the nurses, then leaned close to me and whispered, "Make sure you do not spoil him. He will need discipline, not your softness." It was meant as advice, but I knew better. It was a warning. Even in that sacred moment, she wanted me to feel inadequate. There was also the family portrait incident. One autumn, she arranged for a professional photographer. We gathered in the park, everyone dressed in coordinated colors. As we lined up, she directed placements like a conductor of a cruel orchestra. When I stepped beside my husband, she waved me aside. "Let's just do immediate family for this one," she said, smiling as if it were natural. I stood off to the side, watching flash after flash without me. Later, when the framed portrait hung in her hallway, my absence screamed louder than any presence could. These memories collided with the present. Sitting at the children's table, I realized nothing had changed. She had always been weaving this story, one in which I was the outsider, the accessory, the afterthought. And every time I stayed silent, every time I smiled and swallowed the hurt, I had given her more power. But tonight felt different. Perhaps because I had reached the edge of my patience. Perhaps because I finally understood that silence was not the same as peace. Silence had been survival, but it had also been surrender. I looked at her again across the room. She was laughing at something her brother said, tilting her head back with practiced grace. But her eyes flickered toward me, sharp and assessing. She wanted to see if I would crack. She wanted confirmation that she had succeeded in putting me in my place. I met her gaze and held it, steady and unblinking. My lips curved into a smile, but it was not submission. It was promise. A promise that I was no longer playing her game. The past had taught me how she operated. The present was teaching me how to respond, and the future, I realized, would belong to me if I chose it. The children laughed again, pulling me back to the table. I smiled at them, gentle and warm, then let my eyes wander back to the glowing candles, the shimmering glasses, the woman who thought she had won. She did not know it yet, but the tide was turning. The longer I sat at that small table, the more the contrast pressed itself into my mind. The main table glowed beneath the chandelier. Candles flickered in tall crystal holders. Wine glasses caught the golden light and sparkled like jewels. Silverware clinked against porcelain plates as laughter rose and fell like a carefully rehearsed chorus. Every sound from that table carried weight. Every movement at that table was meant to declare importance. My table was different. The cloth was cheap, with faint stains that no one had bothered to scrub out. The cups were plastic, scratched from years of use. Crayons rolled across the surface, abandoned by restless children. My knees were pressed uncomfortably close together, the chair too small for an adult body. It was impossible not to notice the difference. That was the point. She had chosen this seat for me because it told a story louder than words. I looked down at the plate in front of me. Mashed potatoes half cold, a slice of meat with the edges drying out. Nothing compared to the artfully plated servings at the main table. Even the food seemed to reflect the hierarchy she had created. The children didn't notice, too busy playing with their food or whispering to each other. I forced myself to pick up the fork, if only to keep my hands from shaking. Across the room, her voice rose above the others, smooth, commanding, practiced. She was telling a story about a family vacation, the one where she had booked a villa in the mountains. The story was polished, meant to sound charming. She skipped over the detail that I had been left to sleep on a couch because my name was missing from the reservation. Instead, she painted the trip as idyllic. Everyone laughed at the right moments, nodding as if the past had been flawless. My lips curved into a smile that wasn't real. Every so often, I felt her eyes dart toward me. Just a flicker, quick and sharp, like a hunter checking her prey. She wanted to see my reaction. She wanted to know if I was shrinking into the corner, if the humiliation had worked. I did not give her that satisfaction. I kept my posture tall, my smile serene, my movements steady. The chatter at the main table turned to future plans. Weddings, anniversaries, vacations. Each topic circled around the people she favored, never touching my name, never including me in the circle. I could hear her laughter ring like bells, the way she clapped her hands at a joke, the way she leaned in to whisper to the relative beside her. Every gesture was deliberate, every laugh a reminder that she held the stage. Meanwhile, I studied the details. The way her pearls rested perfectly against her throat. The way her wine glass never emptied, a server always attentive at her side. The way she leaned back in her chair, like a queen surveying her kingdom. Around her, everyone adjusted themselves, smiling when she smiled, laughing when she laughed, lowering their voices when she grew quiet. She had choreographed this dinner like a performance, and I was placed as the punchline. The humiliation pressed heavier when I caught sight of my husband. He sat close to her, nodding at her words, his jaw tight but his lips sealed. He did not glance at me once. I wondered what went through his mind. Did he think silence was safer? Did he believe speaking up would only ignite more fire? His silence felt like abandonment. Yet even as I judged him, I knew he was caught in her gravity, just like the others. A waiter passed by, refilling glasses at the main table. When he reached mine, his hand paused for just a fraction longer than necessary. His eyes met mine for a second. There was pity there, but also something else, something like recognition. I held his gaze, nodded slightly, then returned to my plate. It was enough to remind me that I was not invisible. The children's chatter rose again, loud and innocent. One asked me why I was sitting there instead of with the adults. I forced a smile and said softly that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes. He laughed and returned to his food, but his question lingered in the air, sharper than anything his grandmother had said. Even children knew something was wrong. I shifted in my chair, adjusting the napkin across my lap. My mind raced, not with anger, but with clarity. Every detail of this dinner was meant to trap me into silence. The light, the food, the laughter, the chair I sat in. It was a design carefully laid out to reduce me, but I knew something she did not. Designs can collapse with a single crack. The smell of roasted chicken mixed with the sharp sweetness of red wine. The sound of laughter echoed against the walls. I let every detail wash over me, anchoring them in memory. I wanted to remember how this night felt, the awkward chair, the candlelight shining on faces that looked away from mine, the cold bite of food meant for someone else. All of it would matter later, when the reckoning arrived. Her voice rose again, this time louder, as she toasted to family. She raised her glass high, her eyes sweeping the table, skipping over me deliberately. Everyone lifted their glasses and echoed her words. To family. The irony stung. My own hand tightened around the water glass, but I lifted it slowly, deliberately, holding it steady in the candlelight. When I sipped, my eyes locked on hers across the room. She saw me. For the briefest second, her smile faltered. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. I placed the glass back down quietly, the sound barely a whisper. I breathed in. I exhaled. My heart no longer raced. It beat with certainty. The dinner was not over. Not yet. The humiliation had been staged carefully, but she had forgotten one thing. Performances are vulnerable. All it takes is one unscripted moment, and the entire show unravels. I straightened my posture in the tiny chair. I folded my hands neatly, and I smiled, calm and unreadable. Inside, I was no longer waiting. I was preparing. The chandelier sparkled above us. The laughter carried on. And the stage she had built for my humiliation was slowly becoming the stage for her downfall. The laughter at the long table rose again, a polished wave of sound that seemed to bounce against the chandelier and fall back onto me. I let it wash over me. I let it settle into my bones until it no longer stung. Then, as if guided by something deeper than thought, I placed my napkin gently on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor was sharp. It cut through the laughter like a blade. Heads turned. Forks froze. My husband's eyes finally lifted toward me. My mother-in-law's smile stiffened, caught halfway between delight and alarm. She had wanted my humiliation to be public, but she had not expected my response to be just as public. I lifted my glass slowly, not rushing, not trembling. The water inside caught the candlelight and shimmered faintly. I cleared my throat softly, and the sound carried further than I thought it would. Silence followed, thick and uneasy. The children at my table stopped giggling. Even the waiter paused in the corner, holding his tray just out of sight. I wanted to thank everyone, I said, my voice calm, even warm. For this dinner, for the effort, for the company. My words were polite, but the tone beneath them was firm. It is not every night one has the privilege of sitting at the kids' table. A ripple of discomfort ran through the room. A few cousins shifted in their seats. My husband's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate. I smiled gently, as if nothing were wrong. It was a good reminder, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the table, that respect is not given by a seat, or a title, or even by a family name. Respect is shown. Respect is earned. The silence deepened. My mother-in-law shifted in her chair, pearls glinting against her throat as she straightened. It was just a seat, she said lightly, forcing a laugh. You are overthinking. I turned my eyes to her, meeting her gaze with steady calm. Was it? Because when you pointed me there, you pointed in front of everyone. You wanted to make sure the message was clear. That message was not about space. It was about value. Gasps rose softly around the table. Someone cleared their throat. My husband opened his mouth but said nothing. My mother-in-law's painted smile wavered, then steadied again. We are family, she replied quickly. You should not take offense. Endistas. Family. I repeated softly, letting the word linger. Yes. Family should not take offense when treated as an outsider. Family should not notice when their name is missing from a reservation. Family should not mind when their gifts are misplaced, or when they are cropped out of photographs. My voice was not loud, but each word landed heavy in the air. The room was still. My eyes stayed locked on hers. She blinked once, then again, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. You are imagining things, she said quickly. Her voice was too high, too brittle. I am not imagining anything, I replied. My tone never shifted from calm, but the words sharpened like glass. I have been silent for years. I smiled. I endured. I let you decide where I belonged. But tonight, I realized something. Belonging is not yours to give. It is mine to claim. A murmur spread across the table, quiet but undeniable. Some lowered their eyes, others stared openly, waiting for what would come next. My husband looked pale, caught between fear and recognition. The server in the corner had stopped pretending to look away. Even he was listening. I lowered my glass, placing it carefully on the table beside me. "So thank you," I said softly. "Thank you for pointing me to that table. Thank you for making it so clear, for showing everyone here exactly how you choose to treat me. Because in doing so, you gave me something I had been missing: clarity." The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. My mother-in-law's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time, her confidence faltered in front of her own audience. Her power, built on silence and complicity, had cracked. I took my seat again, not at the children's table, but at the empty chair beside my husband. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one stopped me. No one dared. My husband's eyes followed me, wide with something I could not name: pride, fear, maybe both. I placed my napkin gently in my lap and lifted my fork. I smiled as if nothing had happened, as if the air was not heavy with what I had just said. But it had. The atmosphere had shifted. The dinner no longer belonged to her. The silence was no longer mine. It was hers. She cleared her throat finally, lifting her glass as though to toast again, but her hand shook slightly. The cousins looked at one another, unsure whether to laugh, to speak, or to remain silent. My words lingered in the air, hanging heavier than the scent of roasted chicken or the gleam of candlelight. I did not need to say more. The reckoning was not in the volume of my voice, but in the weight of my calm. She had expected outrage, maybe even tears. Instead, I gave her something far worse: reflection. And in that reflection, I saw what she could not admit: the beginning of her loss. The silence at the table did not break immediately. It lingered like a heavy curtain pulled across the room. Forks remained still. Glasses hovered midair, forgotten in hands that suddenly trembled. My words had landed, and though I had spoken softly, they had echoed far louder than any raised voice could have. I sat calmly in my new seat beside my husband, my posture steady, my expression unreadable. Inside, my pulse slowed. The storm that had built within me for years had finally released, not in fire, not in rage, but in something sharper: truth. And the truth had unsettled her more than anything else. My mother-in-law's face shifted between forced composure and unease. She tried to smile, lifting her glass as though to toast, but her hand shook just enough to betray her. Her pearls gleamed under the chandelier, but the confidence that usually surrounded her had cracked. For the first time, her throne at the head of the table did not look like power. It looked like isolation. Someone cleared their throat. A cousin leaned forward, pretending to ask about the food, but his eyes darted toward me. An aunt adjusted her napkin, her movements restless. The children, sensing tension, though they did not understand it, grew quieter than usual. Even the server in the corner lingered longer, his eyes flicking toward me with quiet recognition. My husband finally spoke, his voice low. "Let's continue dinner," he said, though it sounded less like an invitation and more like a plea. His eyes moved between his mother and me, the weight of divided loyalties pressing against him. I did not answer. I simply lifted my fork and cut into the food in front of me. The sound of metal against porcelain filled the silence. Gradually, conversation returned, but it was thinner now, weaker. The laughter was forced, the stories truncated. Every so often, someone glanced at me, then quickly away, as though my presence carried a mirror they did not want to face. My mother-in-law spoke again, louder than before, trying to reclaim the stage, but the cadence of her words faltered. She was no longer the unquestioned center. I tasted the food slowly. Each bite felt strange, as though it belonged to another world. Around me, the air pulsed with tension. I thought about leaving, standing up, walking out, letting them sit in the silence they had created. But something told me to stay, not out of spite, out of principle. She had tried to erase me, and I would not vanish on command. Minutes dragged on. Plates emptied, glasses refilled. Yet the mood never returned to what it had been. The crack in her authority had spread too wide. She knew it. I saw it in the way her smile faltered, when no one laughed quickly enough at her jokes, in the way her hand tightened around her wine glass like a lifeline. For once, she looked human, vulnerable. When dessert was finally served, I accepted mine calmly. A slice of cake glazed with sugar, too sweet on the tongue. I ate slowly, letting the silence stretch between her and me. She avoided my eyes now, though I could feel her wanting to look. The game had shifted, and she did not yet know the new rules. After the plates were cleared, chairs scraped softly against the floor. People began to rise, voices polite but strained as they said their goodbyes. Some hugged her with less warmth than usual. Some nodded at me quietly before slipping away. No one spoke directly about what had happened, but the air was thick with it, undeniable. My husband walked beside me as we prepared to leave. His hand brushed mine briefly, hesitant, as though unsure whether to take it. I let the contact linger for a moment, then pulled my coat over my shoulders. He said nothing, but his silence carried more than words. At the door, my mother-in-law stood, her posture tall, her smile fixed in place like porcelain. She thanked everyone for coming, her voice sweet, too sweet. When my turn came, she leaned forward slightly. "Thank you for being here," she said. Her words were smooth, but her eyes flickered with something unsteady. For the first time, I saw doubt in them. I smiled back, calm, unbroken. "Of course," I replied simply, my voice steady. "Family dinners are important." Then I walked past her, stepping out into the cool night air. Outside, the air felt fresher, cleaner. The stars scattered across the sky seemed sharper than usual. I inhaled deeply, letting the night fill my lungs. My husband followed, quiet, his steps heavy behind me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Words failed him. Perhaps they always had when it came to her. We drove home in silence. The hum of the car filled the space between us, steady and low. My thoughts replayed the dinner like fragments of a film. The moment she pointed me to the children's table, the hush that followed when I stood, the look on her face when my calmness cut deeper than any anger could. Each detail etched itself into my memory, not as pain, but as proof. When we reached home, I stepped inside and let the quiet of our house embrace me. No laughter staged for control, no glances heavy with judgment, just silence, clean and true. I set my coat aside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. The stillness felt powerful. I thought about her then, about the years of small humiliations, the endless ways she had tried to remind me I was lesser. Tonight she had tried again. But tonight, I had not stayed silent. I had not stormed out either. I had chosen another path. I had chosen dignity. Would she realize what had shifted? Would she understand that in trying to strip me of worth, she had only revealed her own cracks? I did not know. Perhaps she would convince herself it had been nothing. Just a misunderstanding. Perhaps she would cling tighter to her power, pretending she had not been shaken. But the truth was already there, lingering in the silence she could not control. I finished my glass of water and set it down with quiet finality. The night stretched before me, calm and wide. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the author of it. As I turned off the lights and prepared to rest, one thought settled deep within me. She might never recognize what she had lost at that table. But I knew. She had lost the ability to dictate my place, and I had gained something greater. Myself.